right outside Connor English's house. Sue Bradford, Connor English, kia ora to you both. You've both been wonderful. Appreciate your time, thank you. Lisa Owen with Checkpoint. Next, I'm Wallace Chapman. Friday tomorrow, Power Ballad Friday. What do I need to play?
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, a government tourism fund that gave out millions to wealthy parent companies while some small operators missed out is criticised by the Auditor-General for a lack of transparency and evidence to justify some of the handouts. Transmission Gully opens to the public and claims its first victim, a speedster. The labour shortage is not just real, it's critical. Why there is only one worker for every 2 jobs advertised in the South Island. The charity Lifeline needs a lifeline itself after the cancellation of Rhythm and Vines leaves it 30 grand out of pocket. And Wellington can see clearly now the fog is gone. And Will Smith, that smacking saga continues. He's now facing disciplinary action. Amid revelations, he refused to leave the awards.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Finance Minister stands by a controversial tourism rescue package, stressing the uncertainty at the time it was set up. The $290 million scheme was launched early in the COVID-19 pandemic to help keep strategic tourism businesses afloat. An Auditor-General inquiry has criticised the unclear criteria and poor record keeping around how the money was dished out. But Grant Robertson says the government had to act swiftly and decisively.
We will always look at those decisions again, and in hindsight, we may make slightly different decisions. But overall, I stand by the fact that the tourism industry needed support and we had to act.
Applicants were told they had to have exhausted all other avenues before seeking funding, but no proof was ever required. The National Party has launched an investigation after a trolling campaign targeting female politicians in Christchurch was linked to a house owned by a young Nat. Senior Minister Megan Woods says she was among those harassed online by a fake account that's now been traced to the IP address of Bryce Beattie's home. National's Deputy Leader Nicola Willis says using fake identities to harass people online is unacceptable.
We have a code of conduct that makes it clear we don't accept bullying or harassment, including on social media. So we first need to establish exactly what's gone on here and then ensure that there's a very clear message sent. This must not happen again.
Bryce Beattie says his flatmate called him this afternoon, confessing to creating the accounts. Mr Beattie says as well as withdrawing from the local body election, he's also resigned from the National Party. A scenic flight operator has pleaded guilty to charges in relation to the Whakaare White Island fatal eruption. In flight is one of 13 defendants facing health and safety charges laid by WorkSafe over failings in the lead-up to the 2019 eruption in which 22 people died. Leah Tibbett with this report.
In the Auckland District Court today, Judge Evangelos Thomas fined the company more than $227,000 plus costs of $40,000. In-flight lawyer Alistair Darroch told the court the guilty plea is an acknowledgement it did not do everything it should have to ensure the safety of its clients. The company has argued its role was as a ticketing agency. In-flight promoted and sold tour packages to the island off the Whakatane coastline. No in-flight tourists were on Whakaare when it erupted.
A man who was arrested during the Parliament occupation last month was handcuffed there again this afternoon. A video on social media shows about half a dozen officers leading Brett Powers away from the grounds. The police are jeered at by a small group of protesters who are shouting shame. In the first week of February's occupation, Brett Powers tried to breach the police line and enter the building, but was arrested. The police have confirmed they arrested a person at Parliament this afternoon for breaching bail. Truckies are giving the first day of the new Transmission Gully motorway the thumbs up. The 27-kilometre motorway in and out of Wellington opened to the public early this morning and cuts up to 15 minutes off journeys. One truck driver told RNZ the flow of traffic has improved, partly because of the slow vehicle lanes on the motorway's biggest climb. The Chief Executive of Transporting New Zealand, Nick Leggett, says the motorway will change the transport industry.
I've spoken to trucking operators this morning in the Hutt Valley who've sent trucks up to Levin. It's taken 10 minutes off their time one way. So you think about that, a 20-minute saving on a round trip, that makes a big difference to productivity.
And 2 20-year-old men have been arrested after shots were fired in an Auckland car park earlier this month. 5 people were hurt in Sandringham late on the 11th of March. One of the men will be charged with inciting the action that led to the shooting. He's also been charged with aggravated burglary and wounding with intent to injure in relation to another firearms incident in Mount Roskill last year. The second man has been arrested in relation to 2 breaches of bail. To sport, and only Costa Rica stand between the All Whites and a place at the Football World Cup in Qatar in November. The All Whites beat Solomon Islands 5-0 this morning in the final of the Oceania qualifying group and now play Costa Rica in an intercontinental playoff in June. All Whites defender Tommy Smith knows the challenge that Costa Rica will present will be greater than their recent matches, but is sure the side can lift again.
Each window we've got better and better. And we know we've still got plenty more in the tank to get better for the next game. And that's testament to coaching staff, the management team, everything that's done behind the scenes. It gives us the best chance of putting our best foot forward when we cross that white line.
England are 218 for 4 after 40 overs, batting first in their Cricket World Cup semi-final against South Africa in Christchurch. Danny Wyatt has anchored the England innings, scoring her second international century and is unbeaten on 116. The winner will play Australia in the final on Sunday. The All Blacks and Blues prop Nepo Laulala has been suspended for 3 weeks after being red-carded for dangerous play in his side's Super Rugby win over Moana Pacifica on Tuesday night. And Formula One will return to Las Vegas for the first time since the 1980s, with confirmation the city will host a race in November next year. The Las Vegas track of just over 6 kilometres will see drivers roar past landmarks such as the Bellagio Fountains and Caesar's Palace. That's the news.
Coasting down Transmission Gully.
We're expecting it to get pretty busy, but if people do want to go out and have a look at it, it's going to be around a while, hopefully for the next 100 years, so there's plenty of time to drive it.
Jet boats deliver rat tests.
Using various modes of transport, we'll use flying foxes and jet boats to reach some of the outreach parts of the region.
And NASA's star discovery.
There's something that looks for the world like an individual star, something like 1 million or 10 million times brighter than the sun.
The future's so bright. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For northern and western areas of Te Ika Maui from Northland to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Northland today and south of Mount Taranaki tomorrow. Areas of fog as well tomorrow morning. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, often cloudy. A few showers clearing in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay for a time this evening and tomorrow morning. Wellington and coastal Marlborough, fine today. Scattered showers developing tomorrow morning. For inland Marlborough, Nelsa, Bulla and Westland, mainly fine, but a few showers about Bulla and northern Westland tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury and Otago, mainly fine today. Rain spreading north overnight and then clearing tomorrow afternoon. For Southland and Fiordland, scattered rain is developing this afternoon or evening and then clearing tomorrow morning. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, low cloud with drizzle at times. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. A government tourism fund that handed out hundreds of millions of dollars has been criticised for a lack of transparency and clarity. An Auditor-General's report released today confirms many of the concerns small operators raised when the $290 million Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program, or STAP fund, was allocated in 2020. It says ministers handing the money out struggled themselves to define what a strategic asset was. Some criteria was unclear. Tens of millions of dollars were given to businesses owned by profitable parent companies when the money was supposed to support struggling businesses. And official advice to halt the program was ignored. The AG concluded there was limited documentation, and that meant it was hard to determine whether it was value for money or to adequately explain the decisions. Here's tourism reporter Tess Brunton.
Questions began when former Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis unveiled millions in STAP funding for Discover Waitomo and Whale Watch Kaikoura before applications had even closed in June 2020. Not long after, more than $10 million was earmarked for AJ Hackett Bungee in a grant and loan. Other successful applicants had to wait until August that year, and less than a month later, there were calls for a review. The Office of the Auditor-General decided to step in by February last year, announcing it would take a close look at STAP given the amount of public money on the table. The office declined to be interviewed, but in a video accompanied by music and released to media this afternoon, Senior Inquiry Specialist Helen Colebrook says there are definite areas for improvement.
We had some concerns about the transparency of the process and that decisions weren't always clearly documented. Ministers can make whatever decisions they want and they will take advice from a range of people. However, it needs to be very clear why they've made the decisions they have, particularly if that differs from advice that's been provided by officials.
And decision makers, the tourism recovery ministers, didn't accept official advice to stop STAP or fund a small number of tourism businesses instead. Heritage Expeditions co-owner Aaron Russ says the process was far from fair.
I think 100% the government sat back and picked favourite and chose who they wanted to see at the finish line.
The majority of their guests for their remote trips are from overseas. He applied and was rejected.
There was certainly a significant lack of clarity around what was being looked for, what the criteria were, and as an operator in an incredibly challenging situation at the time, really difficult to engage and get any clarity as well.
Hellyview Flights co-owner Yolanda Foles' Cromwell-based business was also unsuccessful. She says they were severely disadvantaged by a flawed system.
Us as a small business is having to compete against big business that has been favoured by government and has made, on top of the COVID problems, it's made life double difficult by having to compete against businesses that have been given the handout, taxpayer money. And yeah, it is because criteria hasn't been consistently applied. Government's gone on a whim of picking winners and losers.
She says the time for words is over.
The Auditor-General is asking for another review. Us on the front line, we don't need another review. We need action now. We need to know how they're going to correct these injustices, what's going to be done about it.
Hiking New Zealand co-director Daniel Murphy didn't apply for STAP funding, saying it didn't look like they were eligible.
In hindsight, looking at who did get funding, we wish we had applied because it appeared those companies didn't meet the criteria either, but they got funding out of the STAP process.
It's been a source of frustration.
We were just puzzled at why these companies that had big parent companies and a lot of money behind them got funding when it was sort of clear they hadn't exhausted other means of funding, which was very clear in the criteria.
The successful applicants got grants or loans from between $148,000 to $8.6 million. Some got both. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the government needs to act swiftly and decisively during a pandemic.
We will always look at those decisions again, and in hindsight, we may make slightly different decisions. But overall, I stand by the fact that the tourism industry needed support. There were significant issues for particularly operators that were very significant for their town or their region, and we had to act.
The Auditor-General's office is calling for a formal review in the next few years to see whether STAP made a difference.
Now, RNZ approached former Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis to speak on the fund that he announced and had previously defended. He passed the buck to current Tourism Minister Stuart Nash, who will join us live after the 6 o'clock news. Fiordland Jet co-owner Chris Adams got halfway through applying for a loan and gave up. He's been reading the report today and joins us now. Chris, what do you make of it?
Oh, Lisa, it's just infuriating. Now, this is my personal opinion, but gee, the Attorney-General's gone to all this effort, and the average businessman was telling them this before it even begun. So disappointing.
What strikes you in particular out of the findings?
Well, there are no findings in my mind. It's everything we already knew. He's just agreeing with. Exhausting all financial avenues. They haven't even, and they didn't even look at the applicants they gave money to, financial ability. Like, it's just incompetent.
So on that point, the report does highlight the fact that parent companies that had significant, financial means, some of their subsidiaries were given tens of millions of dollars. What do you think about that?
Well, my question is why? Why? When we went to fill in the form ourselves, we got to, have you exhausted all financial avenues? No, we hadn't. As I've said, it was only 6-8 weeks after the lockdown. Most of us hadn't even talked to the bank. We didn't even know where we were at. Yet these multi-million companies, some of them on the rich list, one of them I've seen under the Official Information Act, going to see the bank manager next week. Some of them put NA. So the people that gave these grants, they're just out of their depth.
So what, you were punished for being honest, do you think, Chris?
Oh, it's certainly shown us that the honest man loses here. The government's always said, this government said they're going to be open and transparent. The exact opposite's happened. One of the things is, Lisa, that if we'd fallen in a form like this to the Inland Revenue Department, they'd come down on us like a ton of bricks. They'd be wanting money. They'd be wanting penalty payments, be wanting interest. Here we've got rich listers, got tens of millions of dollars, and they're now saying, oh, well, maybe this wasn't done right, but we're going to do nothing about it.
So what do you think? Should some people have to pay the money back?
Bloody oath. Why not? They've fooled in that they had exhausted all financial avenues. The Attorney-General, in my mind, and I haven't read all 60 pages, hasn't really even looked at that. The three businesses that got the money before the stat funding was even closed, they've hardly even mentioned that. So, this is taxpayers' money that has gone to an elite few that, in my mind, a lot of them were dishonest.
What would you like the Tourism Minister to do? Different minister now, Stuart Nash. What are your hopes? What do you want to do?
Well, let's go back a step. Our previous Tourism Minister, did he get sacked? If this was private enterprise, heads would roll. Because we've got an inept system where government officials and government departments, nothing happens. We've got a Tourism Minister now that since he's taken over, with the stat funding, he doesn't even want to talk about it. He won't talk about it. And now, since the stat funding, he doesn't want to give any money to any other operators. He's just tried to say there's no money for tourism. Meanwhile, the mum and dad, the family businesses in New Zealand are absolutely suffering, while the big ones got all this money. An incident, one of our local people in Tiana, where we live, and Tiana has been really struggling, they are offering cheap deals to go on a bus to Milford Sound, have a coach, have a lunch, and come back again with all this funding. They actually rebranded as well with all this government funding.
So, Chris,
the operators can't.
So, Chris, do you feel that they, as in the government, has created an unfair playing field with how they allocated the money among small operators as well?
Oh, absolutely. And we've said this from the word go. And as I said, nothing the Attorney-General's come out with has changed. I think it's anything an average person would have thought we all knew, but it's like, in my mind, a slap on the wrist with a wet bus ticket.
Chris, just quickly before you head off, how are you going at the moment? You're obviously waiting for the Aussies and other tourists to arrive.
It's a struggle. People are trying to support Tiana. There's a lot of locals coming in, but it's a real struggle. And mentally for a lot of guys who didn't apply, and I know some people that didn't apply on companies' behalf, like accountants, like advisors, they're really hurting. But we're here for the long haul. But Lisa, one of the things, for goodness sake, we do not want a review of a review. We've spent millions of dollars by the Attorney-General to get now to tell us what we already knew. Please not let's review it in another 2 years to make us all angry again to say that actually it was a stuff-up. If they're going to do anything, go back, look at was it right that those companies even got the funding in the first place.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Chris Adams, who's the co-owner of Fiordland Jet. 2 young National Party members have resigned and the party launched an investigation into allegations a young Nat was behind an abusive and relentless campaign against Christchurch-based women politicians. Bryce Beattie was revealed as the holder of the household IP address after City Councillor Sarah Templeton made an application to the District Court under the Harmful Digital Communications Act. In a statement on Facebook, Mr Beattie says while he accepts the activity came from his property, he had no knowledge of the behaviour and has had multiple flatmates in the past year. RNZ understands he has now resigned from the party, as has another person who's taken responsibility. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Online abuse of politicians is rife, and more often than not, female politicians are the targets. Labour MP and Cabinet Minister Megan Woods says the campaign mounted against her by this anonymous troll was relentless and highly objectionable.
This was constant, it was targeted, and it was toxic. The normal kind of stuff, unfortunately, that women in public office get used to. Comments about personal appearance, comments about being a woman. Basically, misogyny.
City Councillor Sarah Templeton was also the subject of ongoing and abusive messages that were over and above what she describes as general normal trolling.
It got worse and they started making personal comments asking what menstrual products I used, whether they were eco-friendly, those kind of things. And at that point I blocked them. And that was probably only a week and a half in, at which point they started a targeted online harassment campaign on their own and on other people's pages, including fellow councillors.
She took the matter to court and uncovered the name of the man linked to the house's IP address.
What I wanted to do in the end was to work out who was behind the fake accounts. And so the Harmful Digital Communications Act process allows you to do an unmasking. So you go through NetSafe first, and then a summary goes to the district court. So you file papers. You don't need a lawyer, and the process is free.
Deputy Leader of the National Party, Nicola Willis, says it's appalling behaviour.
Here's a clue. If you have to make up an identity and hide your name and face before you make a comment on social media, don't do it.
A code of conduct investigation will be launched.
We're pleased that we have a code of conduct in place that makes it very clear these matters will be investigated and are unacceptable to the National Party.
She spoke with the president of the party's youth wing this morning.
She utterly condemns this action, as do other young Nats. So the behaviour of this one individual has made every young Nat look bad, and that's not fair, because actually young Nats are interested in the National Party because of policy issues, not because of personal attacks.
Megan Woods says it's not just women on the left who are subject to this kind of abuse.
I don't think online harassment and bullying of women is confined to women of any political stripe. I think that is experienced from women right across the political spectrum. But I think whether or not the National Party has a culture problem is a question for them to answer.
She says the Harmful Digital Communications Act should put people who hide behind anonymous accounts on notice.
This is one of the first cases that has been brought under the Harmful Digital Communications legislation, and the tools that are available under that, that what we now have is a suite of tools so cowards cannot hide behind online pseudonyms.
Bryce Beattie was running in October's local body elections but withdrew his candidacy today, saying after careful consideration he did not want the issue to be a distraction from the election.
It is 21 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And we'd love your feedback. Homa o whakaaro, no reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Let us know what you think about the Tourism Fund, the Strategic Assets Fund. $290 million spent, and some serious questions are raised in the Auditor-General's report about the transparency and the criteria set there. Text me, pātui mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. From tomorrow, Auckland Council will be asking for the public's feedback on a new parking strategy for the city. Despite fears that many Auckland roads would lose their street parking, only 3% are proposed to over the next decade, and mostly in the city or central suburbs like Ponsonby, Sandringham and Mount Eden. Jordan Bond was at today's meeting when Auckland councillors voted to push on with consultation.
This is how Auckland Transport sees roadside parking, an inefficient use of space, often blocked by people's stationary private cars for days on end.
Parking lanes need to be the lowest priority use of that space because they need to be more productive.
Auckland Transport is proposing a new parking strategy to turn curbside parking on main roads into bus, cycle and carpool lanes. Not all main roads would be converted. In fact, it'd only be a small percentage, according to Councillor Richard Hills.
It is only 3.25% of the current road network over the next 10 years that will have some car parking removed when a project is put in its place. This is not removing car parking overnight for fun or for punishment or for any other reason apart from putting in a new bus lane, transit lane, cycle lane.
And while the parking's often free, Auckland Transport says it's essentially paid for by ratepayers. Lead Transport Advisor Michael Roth has run the numbers on what it's costing Aucklanders.
That comes to about 900 hectares of land that's funded by ratepayers. If you value it similar to the adjacent land value and charge a commercial rate, you're looking at an effective subsidy of about $1 billion per annum from ratepayers to free car parking.
At today's council meeting, the motion passed 13 votes to 10, but Councillor Desley Simpson asked Auckland Transport what would happen if Aucklanders didn't want the change. Andrew McGill of Auckland Transport's Integrated Network Planning Team says the status quo is not an option given Auckland's population growth.
Something needs to change in our transport system. We are going to have enormous growth, and we can't have a situation where we put up an option and everyone says, no, not that, but there's no alternative for put up.
Michael Roth says the strategy will make transport fairer as wealthier people tend to drive more.
There is a skew in this parking subsidy towards high-income households. So the extent that we change our system, we do remove some of that skew, which will deliver equity benefits.
Also on today's agenda was Auckland Transport's intention to charge between $2 and $4 for parking at a park and ride, which is currently free. AT says it'll encourage people to walk or bus instead. Councillor Daniel Newman voted against the proposal and says many of his Manurewa Papakura constituents can't catch local buses.
They drive because they don't have a choice, and it really grates me when I hear about people do have the ability to change but they don't. I don't think people necessarily have the opportunity to change, and I really wish that we would stop presuming that they can quickly and easily change tomorrow.
Councillor Wayne Walker voted against the plan too and voiced concerns about the effect of roadside parking restrictions on businesses.
Because I see little, if any, recognition in priorities or anywhere for the critically vital needs of businesses, which are not just shops, but people.
Independent Māori Statutory Board member Karen Wilson says she's unhappy with the lack of consultation with mana whenua and voted against too.
What needs to be done hasn't been done from a mana whenua mātāwaka perspective and doesn't embrace the principles of Te Treaty.
Consultation with those businesses, residents and road users will start tomorrow and run throughout April.
There's already been a speeding ticket and a police car's found itself stuck. Transmission Gully is open to the public. After a ribbon-cutting ceremony yesterday, vehicles were allowed to start journeying up and down the 27-kilometre motorway early this morning. But the new State Highway 1 has also left the old coastal route quiet. Our reporter Jake McKee and cameraman Angus Drever went to check things out.
Transmission Gully is now open to the public. Wellington commuters taking to the lanes in the early hours of this morning to cut time off their route into the capital. Those we've spoken to about it are pretty pleased to finally see it open, but some are even finding it safer. Some people who took the motorway today needed to get in and out of Wellington, but others just wanted to give the road a spin.
Oh, it's great. I don't know why it took so long to open. Too much red tape. I go to Taupo sort of twice a month at the moment, so I've been waiting for it to open for a long time.
We putted up this hill pretty slowly, but yeah, made it all right.
Well, make 10 minutes probably quicker to get to our grandchildren.
It's a lot faster than going all the old way.
But there's the truck drivers too. Gareth McIsaac marvelled at how easily freight vehicles were able to make their way up some of the long and steep climbs. He was also impressed by the complex construction to build the road.
It's quite a climb up there, and when you get up there and you say, God, by crikey, they've taken out some dirt. And I think it's a lovely bit of road.
Another truckie, Stephanie, agreed with Gareth that being able to save up to 15 minutes on a trip to Wellington sounds small, but will help.
PCare? Yep. It could either make or break the ferry. you know, I might make it, or if I had the extra 15 minutes, I could miss the boat.
Transporting New Zealand Chief Executive Nick Leggett thinks Transmission Gully will transform the wider Wellington region.
I've spoken to trucking operators this morning in the Hutt Valley who've sent trucks up to Levin. It's taken 10 minutes off their time one way. So you think about that, a 20-minute saving on a round trip, that makes a big difference to productivity.
But then there's also the coastal route out to the Kapiti coast, which has been redesignated State Highway 59 now that Transmission Gully's State Highway 1. It was nearly deserted today as vehicles naturally flocked to the new motorway, locals waking up to near silence instead of the tune of the morning rush. People we spoke to described it as eerie and like a ghost town. But the quieter roads is something Minister of Transport Michael Wood says will help make coastal communities that line the highway safer. Pukirua Bay store owner Rishi Patel agrees, saying people will be more comfortable walking across or pulling over on State Highway 59, which runs through the centre of town.
Say, for example, you are coming all the way from Mana or Porirua, right? The reason why you don't want to pull your car, even if you need your necessities like chocolate or ice cream or something, but you won't pull over because there will be always a thing that, hey, if I pull over, I might get stuck in the traffic after.
Slightly further north in Paikakariki, local councillor Sophie Hanford hopes the town's main entrance is safer. The intersection is a notorious crash hotspot where traffic is sometimes halted for hours.
That will be something that we'll continue to look to as to how we can make it safer and kind of more effective for now its purpose, which I think is, creating a really enticing entrance to the village so that people can really feel welcomed into our stunning little community.
Safer for some, faster for all. It's only day one, but Transmission Gully is already showing its benefits.
And if you were listening to that one on radio, the footage filmed by Angus Drever will go up on our webpage. And kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei e a checkpoint. Coming up, an Auditor-General's report criticises a lack of clarity and transparency around a government tourism fund scheme that dished out hundreds of millions of dollars during the pandemic. Tourism Minister Stuart Nash is live, and a stubborn blanket of 3-day-old fog finally lifts in Wellington. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now to get to the headlines. Anei a iwi mina pita kōrero.
Nationals Deputy Leader Nicola Willis says using fake identities to harass people online is unacceptable. The party's launched an investigation after female politicians in Christchurch were trolled online. The postings were linked to a house where a young National Party member, Bryce Beattie, lives. He's withdrawn from local body elections and denies being involved. Mr Beattie says someone in his household called him this afternoon and confessed to creating the accounts. The Auckland District Court has heard that a charter flight company's guilty plea was in recognition of its shortcomings. In-Flight has been ordered to pay more than $250,000 for health and safety failings leading up to the 2019 Whakaari White Island eruption. Lawyer Alistair Darragh told the court the company didn't do all it should have to ensure customer safety. He says all those involved in the tragedy should look at what might have been done better. The Finance Minister says the government had to act swiftly and decisively when it set up a controversial tourism rescue package. The $290 million scheme was launched early in the COVID-19 pandemic to help keep strategic tourism businesses afloat. But an inquiry by the Auditor-General says its criteria was unclear and there was poor record keeping around how the money was distributed. Grant Robertson says the tourism industry needed support and the government had to help. And the father of a teenager who died from meningitis says it makes financial sense for vaccines to be freely available. Up to 200 New Zealanders a year will contract meningococcal disease, up to 20% will die from it, and another 20% will have lifelong disabilities. Gerard Rushton says research from the Meningitis Foundation has found a recent 9-day hospital stay for a meningitis patient cost about $1 million. Pharmac has considered making the vaccines more widely available, but doesn't have the budget for it. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa inainei ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk business. Now, Nona, this is an interesting one. Air New Zealand says the rising fuel costs comes with a silver lining for the airline. How does that work?
Well, what's interesting about that was Air New Zealand in an investor call today with analysts and so forth to explain its $2.2 billion financial recovery plan. Also talked about some of the things that it was doing longer term. One of the things it talked about was it was going to focus on growing its domestic network and then optimizing its international routes. Now, one of the things it said about that was that because of the fuel increases, some of the big big airlines are focusing more on short-term flights, and so that they can conserve fuel and so on. And because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to carry half a plane of passengers to New Zealand, that's helping Air New Zealand because there's less competition on its routes, they are anticipating, and they'll be carrying more of their partners' passengers load as well. So it's sort of helping Air New Zealand because on that long-haul route, it's expecting to have less competition.
And boy, it's got some long haul routes coming up with
sure
that one
does.
to New York.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the growth in the number of small businesses. Well, it's not growing that much, is it? What's the reason?
Yes. Well, this is a monitor that Xero, which is a cloud-based software accounting firm, it's been tracking small business activity and so on over some time now. And one of the things it's found is that in January, there was a in February, there was a big drop in the number of new business growth in the month from January to February. Now, they're suggesting there that overall, over the year, it's an impressive number, but when you start to drill down, it shows that there's a slowing. So basically, the reason why is job growth. There is very little of that going on, and as a result, small businesses are really struggling to find the people they need to either get established or to grow their business at all.
And Nona, let's take a jaunt around the markets, eh?
Oh, jaunting it will be, yes. Let's go there. 11-point rise in the NZX Top 50 Index. It was following up Australia there. Certainly the Asia-Pacific market's looking a little stronger. So we rose that 11 points to 12,110. And the New Zealand dollar, it's steady at 69.6 US cents, 92.9 Australian and 53.1 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. And let's continue the theme. The labour shortage is not just tight, it's critical. That's according to new data out today. The report by Sense Partners for Business New Zealand shows in most parts of the country, including the entire South Island, there is only one able worker for every 2 jobs advertised. It also signals once the border reopens, New Zealand will be playing catch-up in a global warfare for talent. Financial analyst at Sense Partners, Shamubeel Eaqub, joins me now. Kia ora, Shamubeel. What skill areas are we talking about when we discuss these shortages? Is it low-income, low-skill roles or what?
It is so widespread. Every type of business is really crying out for workers, and what we're finding is it's in retail, it's in hospitality, it's in construction, it's in trades, logistics, diesel mechanics, automotive mechanics, you name it. It's just really widespread. And, the challenge for these businesses is there is so much demand, but they simply can't meet it because they don't have the workers available.
Is this all down to border closures?
I think 2 things. We've had a very strong economy, so there is a lot of demand. People are still spending money. Things have come off a bit this year so far, but the underlying economy is still in pretty good shape. And at the same time, we've had very little growth in the population, which we have normally relied on through immigration.
So businesses will be sitting on the edges of their seats waiting for the government's immigration rebalance, right? The complaint has been in the past that we've relied too heavily on imported labour and not all of it skilled. So what level does that rebalance have to be set at in order to basically satisfy our situations vacant?
Yeah, and I think it's a hard one, right? Because right now, if you want to fill the vacancies, it's very hard to train people up, especially when we're looking at a record low of unemployment. So there are very few people who are out there looking for work. We can get a bit more, try to get people out of part-time work and things like that. But really, we're not going to ask retired people to come back to work if they don't want to work. The challenge for us is the long term. If we want to not have immigration, then we must have it from something else. And that's having a training and education system that's able to create the jobs or the people that can meet the demands. So we haven't done that. So, we have underinvested in our education and training sector for the last half a many decades because we had a really easy out through immigration.
Okay, so it brings us to one of the points that you've made in this report, which is about people in study. What is happening with people who are studying at the moment?
So people who are studying who are not in work. So that proportion of the population is near historic lows. So we want to see more people in study because that gives you the skills and education to be able to get good jobs going forward. But that's coming off, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is, there's so much demand for workers, you can get work. The other is that we didn't have that huge recession that we had feared, which quite often gets people into study. So the strong economy and all of that has helped. But I do have some concerns around how are we going to build that pipeline of talent if our education system's not creating these future talents and future workers for our businesses.
Is the Great Resignation, is it actually a thing here in New Zealand, Shamubeel?
Not yet. Our economy has actually been in pretty good shape. So, it's an important narrative really from the US where they did have a great big quit, right? So because people quit their work because, you were taking your life, you're putting your life at risk by going to work, especially in the early parts of the pandemic. But in New Zealand, we didn't have that. And we had, the wage subsidy and other things that were, some would say too generous, but worked really well in terms of preserving jobs and businesses. So we haven't seen that yet, but I would expect to see more people moving because the labor market's so tight. You can get good promotions and income gains by moving to somebody else. But I think businesses would be foolish to let their staff go. They should really focus on retaining as much as they can. And if they want to hold on to their staff, they need to give them better pay, better working conditions, and also the things that people want, which is, satisfaction at work, career opportunities, development opportunities, the soft stuff that's hard to quantify.
It's going to get really interesting, isn't it? Because now that the borders are basically open and New Zealanders can travel freely in and out of the country, are we going to see a big exodus?
Look, there's a bunch of New Zealanders, like tens of thousands of New Zealanders, who haven't been able to go on their usual OE and other things for the last 2 years. And we are going to see them go. And we don't want to stop that, right? Because it's kind of a rite of passage as a New Zealander to be able to go and travel, to be able to go and work elsewhere. And that's part of, I think, a big risk for businesses, that the young people who have been in your workplace for the last couple of years might now decide that time is right.
Are we going to see amazing wages then? If there's all these vacancies and not enough people, where are wages going and how fast?
Wages are rising pretty fast already. So if I look at the monthly data, so already in February, they're rising at about 8% compared to this time last year. Those are pretty big rates. What happens is not everybody's wages are being reset every month, right? So we're going to see that those wage increases spread out over the course of the next few months. So over the course of this year, we expect to see wage inflation picking up a lot. And many businesses will be able to afford it. That's because prices are rising, there is a lot of demand, and that lets them increase prices as well as increase their costs.
We're almost out of time, but I'm curious, when do you think that the peak labour crunch will happen, or is it happening right now?
Look, I think the real crunch is when New Zealanders decide that it's time to do that big OE. I think that's when we're going to see a real intensifying in the labour shortages, because we're not going to get that immigration rebalance or reset, whatever it is, really clarified for some months. And in between, I think we're going to see that exodus of New Zealanders, particularly, I think younger New Zealanders who have been waiting a couple of years very patiently, and they're going to say, it's time.
Thanks, Shamubeel. And speaking of young New Zealanders, I think there's a couple in your house that are screaming out for your attention. Hey, thanks for joining us. That is financial analyst at Sense, Shamubeel Eaqub there. And speaking of situations vacant, there is one, while one or more generous donors is needed to fill a financial gap that's been left after Gisborne's Rhythm and Vines got canned. Lifeline Aotearoa operates a phone service for people who are in distress or suicidal. And for the past 4 years, the music festival has donated part of its ticket sales to the charity. This year's chunk of change was expected to be around $30,000. Lifeline's Helena de Fonteroy joins me now. Good evening. What does this mean, this $30,000, not having it? What does that translate to in practical terms?
Oh, hi there. So $30,000 would fund about 1,000 helpline calls or support a counsellor, in a part-time situation for a year. So it does make an impact.
Yeah, that is a lot of calls. So what happens without that money? Is it just the people you have to work longer hours, take more calls, or what is the situation?
We have a great team of counsellors and volunteers, so they'll keep going and they'll keep answering the phones. We're really lucky to be supported by Presbyterian Support Northern, so the helpline will keep running. But that money does mean that we need to consider what we can do to expand the helpline if we can.
Yeah, is it hard to get donations at the moment? I mean, cost of living's high, people have been through, a couple of years of COVID. Are people still giving money?
I'm not sure about how much we're getting in at the moment, other than we're not getting this donation. And yes, people have got lots to think about. There's the war in Ukraine, there's petrol costs, definitely. So we are appealing to anyone if they've got something. A call costs $30, so if you can donate $30, that would be great.
Yeah, what is happening with the demand for your service right now, given all the things that you've just listed?
Yeah, so our calls have gone up 20% since 2019 overall, and our texting service is up 30%. So there's definitely a need for Lifeline to keep going. A lot of people think that we're government funded, and we're not. We do rely on the donations of great supporters like Rhythm and Vines to keep going.
To be clear, not a cent of government funding?
No, we're not funded on the helpline.
What would you say to, say, a corporate out there who may be able to afford that $30,000 that you're missing?
Please get in touch. We'd love to have a conversation about what that money could mean and how we can work with you to get that.
Yeah, and while we've got you on the line, to people out there, because there is plenty of them who are struggling, your advice to them in terms of the line?
Check in with each other. If you haven't talked to a friend in a while, reach out and say, hey, how are you doing? We get lots of people calling because they don't have anyone else to talk to, so really connect with each other. And if you do need support and can't connect, please do give us a call on 0800 Lifeline. We'll be there to take your call.
Helena, do you think that loneliness is a bigger thing than it has been in the past?
Oh, definitely since COVID. I mean, you're effectively being told to isolate. So a lot of people feel that isolation physically also means mentally. So please do keep reaching out to people. Technology is great with FaceTime and Facebook, so keep connecting with people. It's one of our biggest reasons that people call.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is Helena de Fontenay, who is with Lifeline, and they're short $30,000 because they get that. Well, they were expecting that from Rhythm and Vines, but obviously the concert has been cancelled, and they're hoping to find another donor. A stubborn blanket of fog has been causing significant travel disruptions in and out of Wellington again today. The capital has been undercover for almost 3 days now, and it's grounded almost every flight since Tuesday. The sky finally cleared at lunchtime, but Wellington Airport's now resembling Grand Central Station as travellers scramble to get a flight. Our reporter Kirsty Frame has been with those left grounded today.
It might be hard to believe, but Wellington has been in need of a windy day. Persistent fog has been blanketing the airport and sounding foghorns in the middle of the night. Over 200 flights have been cancelled since Tuesday. This morning, almost every flight was grounded, and from the terminal, the tarmac was out of sight. Travellers inside had been coming and going since Tuesday, hoping to catch a flight out.
I'm just waiting to see if I'm going to get a flight. If not, I'll have to go home again.
We just went through a repercussion of rebookings.
They just keep saying come back, and it's the next morning, so.
They sent an email at 4:30 or something in the morning, but we thought we'll come here anyway in case we can get another flight.
Yesterday the queues were just going for miles, or was it in the evening? It's all becoming a bit of a blur.
It's fog, what can you do?
While some were missing holidays, others were foregoing their medical appointments or connections to international flights. Some opted for other modes of transport, but it hasn't been smooth sailing across the Cook Strait either.
We managed to squeeze a booking on the Bluebridge Ferry, but we've also got a notice from Bluebridge Ferry that there's going to be a 5-hour delay with them due to cargo reshuffling.
One couple whose flight was cancelled decided to try carpooling.
Yeah, we're just sort of trying to find a carpool chain. Kind of just hoping for the best. We found another lady who also needs to carpool, so we're just sort of scouting around. So yeah, a little bit cheaper on the old petrol money.
And while the rest of the city seems relatively unaffected, residents have been woken in the night to this sound. Foghorns, used by ships entering and leaving the harbour in foggy conditions, were going off from about 11 p.m. last night. Wellington City Council says it took a few calls last night from grumpy residents as far away from the sea as Karori. This morning, neighbouring Lyell Bay locals were making the most of the quiet time.
To have no wind in Wellington is an uncommon situation.
It was like being in a little English seaport with, the mist and the sound of the foghorns.
The foghorn was going on last night, going on and on and on though, which was unusual.
Yeah, I quite like it, but because you don't have to fly, it doesn't really affect me at the moment. If I did have to fly, then it would be a bit of a problem.
The fog lifted at about 1 p.m. today, and dozens of catch-up flights finally took to the skies.
Nearly a third of all current COVID community cases are children and teenagers. Latest Health Ministry figures show 14.4% are children aged 9 and under, and 17.4% are aged between 10 and 19. Andrew McRae reports.
The Director-General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says the numbers of children and teenagers getting the virus has been similar throughout the Omicron outbreak. Professor of Children's and Women's Health at Otago University, Peter McIntyre, says vaccinations for the young are extremely important.
The complications of Omicron are uncommon, but if we see it as an insurance policy against getting severe disease, and remember that in addition to that, for the individual child, there are benefits to the family, the community and the school from reductions in infection, and particularly given the fact that this vaccine is available free to all New Zealand children, it does look like an insurance policy worth taking up.
Dr Bloomfield says surveys of parents of young people who have been vaccinated are very reassuring.
18% reported some sort of side effect post-vaccination. For the second dose, the equivalent figure was 24%. Most common were reaction at the injection site, headache and fatigue, all expected and commonly reported side effects that pass quickly.
There are 15,250 new community cases today, with a rolling 7-day average of 14,515. Dr Bloomfield says the outbreaks reveal differences in what's happening in metropolitan centres compared to the regions. He says in big city DHBs, the figures went up quickly, peaked and are coming down quite quickly.
We're seeing a different pattern out in the regions where the outbreak develops more slowly and there is a more sustained peak.
And he says generally the hospitalisation rates are lower in the regions.
So if I take Tairāwhiti, for example, over the last 2 weeks it's had the highest case rate in the country, but has only ever had just a handful of hospitalisations and just 1 or 2 a day in the last day or so.
Dr Bloomfield says it's important for anyone who's had the virus but hasn't completed the vaccine dose to still get it. This requires a wait of 3 months from the date a person tests positive.
For all ages, and it also applies to all COVID-19 vaccines in New Zealand. This wait of 3 months after testing positive can give a better level of protection and an improved immune response to the vaccine.
He's warning that once the outbreak has peaked across the country, infections will remain, particularly heading into winter. He's predicting around 3,000 to 5,000 cases a day, and some will still require hospital treatment.
And also what we have seen overseas, and we are seeing here, a long tail in that hospitalisation rate. So it's I'm expecting we will still have several hundred people in hospital through April and into May, and then of course we will have winter coming on, when we know that respiratory viral illnesses like COVID, like RSV, other coughs and colds and influenza, of course, are more common.
Flu vaccinations are available from tomorrow. Dr Bloomfield says people who've had COVID can get a flu jab as long as they've finished their isolation period. He says without a doubt, flu will come across the border.
The parents of a teenager who died suddenly from meningitis have delivered a petition to MPs, pleading for the government to fund vaccines against the disease. Currently, just one vaccine is available for free, and only for 13 to 25-year-olds entering a boarding school, hostel, halls of residence, military barracks or prison. The parents of 16-year-old Courtney Rushton won't rest until all children have free access to it. Emma Hatton reports.
She was just a normal 16-year-old. She had a lot of friends. She was very sporty. She was quite a highly intelligent girl. At home, she had the messiest room ever, as all children do. She just had this vibrancy about her. You know, she was, we think, stunningly gorgeous. She had big, beautiful blue eyes and this amazing smile.
The mother of 16-year-old Courtney Rushton, Claire, describing her daughter, who died suddenly from meningitis 8 years ago.
Today, she and her husband Jared ripping the scab off their own loss in order to have politicians hear their plea.
It's so important to have protection because often cure is not an option because it moves so fast. I mean, the symptoms sometimes don't present like meningitis, they just present like normal flu symptoms, and often by the time it's too late. So that's why protection is needed.
Today, their petition on behalf of the Meningitis Foundation, carrying more than 6,000 signatures, was delivered to National's health spokesperson Shane Reti.
This is well received by the community. It's an important piece of work that has been on the agenda for a long period of time. It needs to move off the whiteboard into people's arms. That's what we're looking to do.
Up to 200 New Zealanders a year will contract meningococcal disease, and up to 20% will die from it. Around another 20% go on to suffer lifelong disabilities, including limb loss, cerebral palsy and brain damage, something Gerard Rushton says costs the health system far more than the upfront cost of about $450 to become fully immunised.
A recent person that contracted the disease and unfortunately passed away had 9 days hospitalisation, and that cost over $1 million. A conservative estimate at the moment of what it costs for someone that has limbs removed and their lifetime care is sort of north of $10 million, so the figures do add up.
The petition calls for Parliament to make 2 currently available vaccines free for all people aged 16. One that covers the A, C, W and Y strains, and the other which covers the B strain. Only the first of these vaccines is currently free, and only to people entering close contact living situations like halls of residence, army barracks or prison. The Health Minister Andrew Little acknowledges more needs to be done.
This is a disease that we do need to keep people, particularly young people, safe from. I'm sure there's more that can be done. In the end, Pharmac has to make its decisions, and it's ongoing work in terms of providing them support.
The Meningitis Foundation wants the vaccines fully rolled out by 2025.
Pharmac says vaccines for meningitis are funded for close contacts of meningococcal cases or people who are immunocompromised. The All Whites are 90 minutes of football away from a 4th appearance at the World Cup. This morning's 5-0 thumping of the Solomon Islands in the final of the Oceania qualifying tournament in Doha booked New Zealand's spot in June's intercontinental playoff. They'll face Costa Rica in that one-off match, and the winner securing their place at the World Cup in Qatar later this year. Sports reporter Clay Wilson joins me now. Clay, just one step left. Is it going to be easy for the All Whites?
No, it certainly won't be easy, Lisa. Kia ora to you. Look, it has to be first said, the All Whites were emphatic this morning. 5-0 is a real statement in a final, and they've clearly been the best team of this tournament, won all their games. Also worth noting that New Zealand had to use a squad of 30 players for this tournament, and that's because it started before the official international window kicked in. Also, several key players that didn't even feature at all, the likes of Sarpreet Singh, Ryan Thomas and Marco Rojas, not even featuring at this tournament. All that said, Costa Rica is still going to be favourites when it comes to this intercontinental playoff in June. They've finished 4th in the CONCACAF region, played some very tough matches to get that spot. They've also been to 4 of the last 5 World Cups, so gives you some idea of their pedigree when it comes to World Cups. Now, New Zealand, obviously the last time they qualified through this route, the intercontinental playoff, when they went to the World Cup in 2010 in South Africa. They've failed through that route the last 2 times. But a couple of key differences this time around, good news for All Whites fans, and that's that this time around it's a one-off game and it's also on neutral ground. It'll be played back there in Doha in Qatar. So if the All Whites can get healthy, if they can get some of those key names back, you have to think they're going to be rating their chances of pulling off the upset and going to a 4th World Cup.
And speaking of World Cups, some reports surfacing around the Black Ferns and the review into team culture. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so as a reminder, there was a review instigated back in December, and that came after Black Ferns hooker Takura Ngata Rangamate made a lengthy social media post saying that she'd had a mental breakdown as a result of her treatment in the team, and that included on the recent tour to Europe, where, of course, the Black Ferns lost all 4 of those games, 2 to England and 2 to France. So we've been awaiting the results of this review, and News Hub are reporting that those results are due in the coming days, and that head coach Glenn Moore is likely to retain his job ahead of this World Cup. Now, New Zealand Rugby say there's no final decisions. They don't have the final review yet. They are saying there is an update coming in the next couple of days, but what we understand is that update is basically that the draft of the review has been complete. It's going to go out to various stakeholders to be reviewed, and then next week sometime the public will get a redacted, the media will get a redacted version, and we'll see those results. So what exactly the review says about Glenn Moore and the culture within this team, we won't know until then. But if the report is true and that he is set to retain his job, then New Zealand Rugby could well have just made a judgment call here that the results don't warrant dropping him as head coach ahead of this World Cup. Also worth noting, the World Cup just a little more than 7 months away. So whatever decision they make around this head coaching position is going to have a significant impact on what the Black Ferns are going to be able to do, their prospects for this World Cup.
And so many World Cups, so little time, Clay. We're coming up to the news, but you got about 1 minute and 15 seconds. The second semi-final of the Women's Cricket World Cup being played in Christchurch today.
Yeah, so obviously we saw Australia advance yesterday and England against South Africa for the other place today. England are defending champs, a slow start, but they've snuck their way into the semi-final. South Africa only lost one of their 7 games in that group stage. They're only lost to Australia. So England have batted first. They've posted a very good score of 293 for 8. So South Africa chasing a challenging 294 to win this game and earn their spot in the final. But whoever advances, Lisa, this final, you have to say, no pressure, but it's Australia's to lose at this point. They've been so dominant. They've won all their games. Anything, of course, can happen in one game in a tournament final, but they will deservedly be very strong favourites, whoever they play in this final on Sunday.
Do you want them to win, Clay?
I think we all know the answer to that, Lisa. I think it would be, wouldn't as Kiwis, we never shy away from seeing Australia maybe trip up every now and then, and an upset. We all like to see an upset as well. So
well said, Clay. Thank you.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A Christchurch City Councillor says she used the Harmful Digital Communications Act to unmask an online troll targeting female politicians. Sarah Templeton was among a group of local women harassed by online accounts that have been traced to a house belonging to a young member of the National Party. City Councillor Sarah Templeton says the abuse was over and above what she describes as normal trolling, so she took matters into her own hands.
What I wanted to do in the end was to work out who was behind the fake accounts. And so the Harmful Digital Communications Act process allows you to do an unmasking. So you go through NetSafe first, and then a summary goes to the district court. So you file papers. You don't need a lawyer, and the process is free.
The young Nat, Bryce Beattie, accepts the activity came from his property but denies any knowledge of it. Mr Beattie says his flatmate called him this afternoon confessing to creating the accounts. Mr Beattie says he's resigned from the National Party and withdrawn as a candidate in October's local body elections. The party's launched an investigation into the allegations. A Fiordland tourism operator says an Auditor-General report slamming the government's COVID tourism fund is vindication for many small businesses. The fund is being criticised for a lack of transparency and clarity, with money handed out to businesses owned by profitable parent companies rather than supporting struggling businesses. Official advice to halt the program was ignored. Fiordland Jet co-owner Chris Adams has told Checkpoint that small companies like his were punished for being honest about their finances, while what he calls rich listers cashed large amounts of money. He says the well-off companies should pay back the money. The Auckland District Court has heard that a charter flight company's guilty plea was in recognition of its shortcomings. In-Flight has been ordered to pay more than $250,000 for health and safety failings leading up to the 2019 Whakaari White Island eruption, in which 22 people died. Lawyer Alistair Darroch told the court the company didn't do all it should have to ensure customer safety. He says all those involved in the tragedy should reflect and look at what might have been done better. The comedian Chris Rock has spoken publicly for the first time about getting slapped at the Oscars by Will Smith. At a stand-up show in the US city of Boston, he says he was still processing what happened and will talk more about the incident later. Meanwhile, Will Smith faces punishment for his actions. The BBC's Jason Kay reports.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences says it's now begun disciplinary action against the actor. He could be suspended or expelled from the organisation, or could lose privileges such as the ability to vote in the Oscars or attend Academy events. He could also have his Oscar revoked, although that's thought to be unlikely, or he could simply receive a reprimand. Smith will be given the opportunity to give a written response before the Board of Governors votes on the matter in a little over 2 weeks' time.
Only 3% of Auckland's roads will lose street parking over the next decade. A controversial proposed parking strategy will now go to public consultation. Andrew McGill from Auckland Transport says the status quo of roadside parking is not an option, given Auckland's population growth.
Something needs to change in our transport system. We are going to have enormous growth, and we can't have a situation where we put up an option and everyone says, no, not that, but there's no alternative to put up.
Feedback on the proposal opens tomorrow and runs throughout April. Thousands of Wellingtonians have hit the road today to test drive Transmission Gully, which has finally opened to the public. The police have issued a small number of infringement notices, but say overall they're pleased with driver behaviour. Rosie Gordon reports.
The biggest hazard on the road today was other motorists pulling over to admire the views from the new 27-kilometre highway. Police say they appreciate people want to check out the new road, but drivers need to remember it's a motorway and it is illegal to stop. Meanwhile, a police patrol vehicle ran into trouble when it pulled off the shoulder and ended up stuck in deep gravel designed to slow out-of-control vehicles. Police say driver error was to blame.
And some flights in and out of Wellington are still experiencing minor delays as airlines work to clear the backlog caused by fog this week. Most flights through the capital have been cancelled since Tuesday, but finally resumed at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Wellington International Airport says normal operations have resumed, but airlines are still working to catch up. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Our Changing World ponders the future of cancer treatment. The BBC investigates the idea of a smart fishing net. It snares the ones you want to eat, letting the ones you want to live go. And our pulp culture correspondent Lorna Piatti-Finau wants to discuss vampires, given it's 100 years since the release of the blood-sucking movie classic Nosferatu. On Nights, Let the Right One In, with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For northern and western areas of Te Ika Maui from Northland to Kapiti, including the Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Northland today and south of Mount Taranaki tomorrow. Areas of fog as well tomorrow morning. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Often cloudy, a few showers clearing in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay for a time this evening and tomorrow morning. Wellington and coastal Marlborough. Fine today, scattered showers developing tomorrow morning. For inland Marlborough, Nelson, Bulla and Westland, mainly fine, but a few showers about Bulla and northern Westland tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury and Otago, mainly fine today. Rain is spreading north overnight and then clearing tomorrow morning. Scattered rain is developing this afternoon or evening for Southland and Fiordland and then clearing tomorrow morning. And low cloud is forecast for the Chatham Islands with drizzle at times. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho no mai, haere mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A top public watchdog has criticised the lack of clarity and transparency around a government tourism funding scheme that dished out hundreds of millions of dollars. The $290 million Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program was paid out to 127 businesses. At the time, a number of tourism operators complained the application process was unclear, the decision-making opaque, and large operators were getting grants despite having parent companies with significant financial reserves. An Auditor-General's report has now found some of the criteria wasn't clear. A lack of documentation made it hard to see if funding was fair and there was value for money. No inquiries were made about parent companies' equity and resources. And 3 companies were signed off for grants following a limited assessment before the scheme even opened. There was also no consistent method of deciding how much money to give each business. It was a carry-on full of cash from the government for a select few tourism businesses, select being the key word. Checkpoint spoke several times to then Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis in 2020 about the scheme and the integrity of the choices being made. Here he is announcing the first $4 million from the grant and loan scheme would go to Discover Waitomo.
They are a strategic tourism asset. They fit the criteria. Without them there, the region would well struggle.
He confirmed 2 other companies had already been promised a Lifeline too, but the minister was coy about naming them.
There are other companies that were hoping to make announcements, but they'll be made in the coming days.
So are there 2 other applications that have been approved?
There are a couple of other applications that have been approved, and there are more applications on the way.
The big reveal came later. Whale Watch Kaikoura and AJ Hackett Bungie. But here's the thing. All 3 companies had funding signed off before official applications even opened for the thousands of other struggling tourism businesses. At the time, Checkpoint queried the process. Were they asked to apply? Because applications only opened today, so what process did they actually go through?
Yeah, so there is capacity for us as the tourism recovery ministers to hear urgent and ad hoc applications.
The minister admitted he hadn't even seen the application. Part of the application, though, Minister, they had to identify exactly what the money was going to be spent on. So did you see that part of their application?
No, so I haven't seen the application, but their application was recommended to myself and the other tourism recovery ministers. And so, we were happy to support it.
The Auditor-General says ministers have broad discretion to make decisions, but spending public money comes with an obligation to ensure that decision-making is consistent and transparent. And there was limited evidence explaining these choices. In the AG's view, that is not acceptable practice, especially when it comes to ensuring public confidence in the integrity of the decisions made. Checkpoint earlier revealed Whale Watch Kaikoura simply sent a letter asking for some money. When you made this application, did you have to put in some numbers for how much the economic knock-on effects might be, what amount of money you might be able to bring to the district? Did you have to put a number on that?
The economic spin-off is quite significant, but if we look...
Can you put a number on it?
Yeah, well, that ranges. Some would say 20 million, the others would say 100 million.
The AG's report confirms how loose the process was. Whale Watch filled out a form it created itself, and there was no supporting financial information. AJ Hackett Bungie got more than $10 million through the scheme. To qualify, businesses needed to exhaust all other financial options. Now, Checkpoint did ask the Minister about documents we obtained under the Official Information Act. So in the AJ Hackett application, under that section, have you sought other financial assistance? It said they had approached their bankers, but, quote, no response to date.
AJ Hackett was one of the businesses that said that they were going to fall over and 83 jobs will be lost, so we made an urgent decision.
Yeah, what was the logic in giving money to enterprises that are owned by parent companies with significant assets and resources? What was your logic there?
Well, we had to take the applicants or the urgent applicants at face value.
The Auditor-General says it was unclear what exhausting all other avenues of support meant, and basically applicants were not asked for evidence. One minister told the AG they didn't want to give money to profitable parent companies, but in reality, they gave tens of millions to their subsidiaries. And joining us now is Stuart Nash, the current Tourism Minister. Kia ora, Minister. Are you embarrassed by any of this?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, look, the AG also highlights the fact that ministers were operating under great urgency at a time of massive uncertainty, as we know, and they had to make decisions quickly.
But he also says those circumstances are no excuse for the lack of documentation and the lack of clarity around decisions with such an enormous amount of money.
Well, the AG did say that it's hard to determine whether the funding was applied fairly. They didn't say that it wasn't, just hard to determine. Look, we're all wise in hindsight, Lisa.
And are you happy with that, Minister? Just hard to determine?
We're all wise in hindsight. The AG had the ability to look at this from the cold hard light today after ministers had made really, really tough decisions at a point in time when no one had any knowledge of where this pandemic was going. We had some really important strategic tourism assets in this country. There was the belief that if they'd gone under, then they might have been sold to large foreign interests. So it really was a point in time of great uncertainty. But, maybe things could have been done better. The AG has given us a bit of a roadmap if we even need to...
well, the AG has said that things could have been done better, not that maybe they could have been done better, they could have been. When you say that it's great in hindsight, actually at the time this fund came out and during the actual process of the grants, so while it was operating, not after the fact, businesses, and a number of them, raised very serious concerns about how the fund was being administered. Why wasn't something done at the time?
My understanding is businesses raised concerns after the fund had closed, and these were businesses that had missed out. I mean, the AG, made a very good point that there were some areas that could have been clear. I accept that. And I accept the recommendations made in the report. In fact, there was only one recommendation, and that is that MB take a good hard look and see if the STEP fund did actually meet its obligations and its objectives. And we will undertake that.
You sound pretty casual about the whole thing, Minister, when you're talking about $290 million in people's livelihoods.
No, what we are talking about here, Lisa, is getting money out the door really quickly to businesses that were on the point of going under.
Were they, though? Were the ones that you gave money to? And this is an important point that's raised in the Auditor-General's report, right? So there were some significant businesses that got tens of millions of dollars. And even one of the ministers in the group was very concerned that parent companies that had a lot of financial resources should not get this money because this was for businesses that were about to fall off a cliff, right? But in fact, you did pay money to businesses that were owned by companies that had huge resources. Are you going to ask for the money back?
Well, keeping in mind, Lisa, that at that point in time, the STEP fund, as well as things like the wage subsidy and the small business cash flow loan scheme, were based on a high trust model. So we accepted the information that was provided to us. In fact, Deloitte ended up doing a review of the companies that had been provided with STEP loans and grants to check that the money was being used in the way that these companies said it would be used. And they found that by and large, yes, the money was being used appropriately. Look, remember.
Do you accept, though, Minister, that you did give significant amounts of money to companies that didn't actually need it?
No, I don't accept that. What I do accept is that money was given out at a point in time where there was massive uncertainty. These companies didn't know whether they were going or staying. They didn't know whether they were going to have to lay up a whole lot of workers, go into hibernation. In fact, if you have a look at the rationale from those big three companies, it was about saving jobs and stopping these companies from going into hibernation. But keep in mind that amongst the companies that ended up with loans and grants were companies from right across the sector, small operations through to big operations and everything in between, including every Maori tourism organisation that applied.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. There are businesses that missed out because they simply stopped partway through the process because they felt they couldn't sign a form honestly that said they'd exhausted all financial options when they still owned houses and they hadn't remortgaged. And the Auditor-General touches on that in the report. Would you like to apologise to any of those businesses?
Well, what I would say, and I agree with the Auditor-General on this point, that perhaps that area was unclear and should have been made clearer. I don't, and I asked MB officials and I asked the Auditor-General if, in fact, those who did stop those applications and those who ended up after the fact complaining that it was unclear, if they had phoned up officials to seek clarification around what that actually meant, and no one could tell me whether that had been done or not. But look, I accept the
Auditor-General says it's your job, it's the government's job to make sure that criteria are clear, and if they're not, then don't include them.
Well, at the time, I wasn't one of those ministers, but I'm not absolving myself from any responsibility.
No, well, because we've been told you're the official spokesperson on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So. But having said that, I accept the Auditor-General's finding that, in fact, some of the criteria, and certainly that one around exhausting all other alternatives, could have been made clearer.
Okay, because the report also says that the ministers themselves, well, they didn't really know what the definition of a strategic tourism asset was. They didn't know what the difference between that and a general tourism asset was. That's a fundamental plank of the scheme, isn't it? How can you not know that?
Yeah, well, what we were doing is we were asking businesses to define why they were strategic and why they should have been part of the scheme. Keeping in mind, Lisa, I go back to my original point, that we were operating at a point in time where we didn't know how long this pandemic was going to go for, whether these businesses were going to fail or not, whether they're going to be bought by overseas owners or not, and we needed to get money out the door in order to keep these businesses afloat. We reckon we saved about 3,000 jobs.
But you don't know that yet, do you? Because the Auditor-General says because there's no clear documentation, no clear criteria, it's not possible to tell whether the taxpayer got value for money. So you can't actually reach that conclusion.
Well, we can reach that conclusion. I mean, that is a statement of fact. We believe we saved around 3,000 jobs. But the other thing, as I've alluded to, is that Deloitte did do a review and found that the money that had been given to these businesses was by and large spent in a way that was part of the scheme's objectives. And we will do a review of the STAT program just to check that the money did go to the right companies and it was spent appropriately.
A couple of other things, Minister. There was a score system, right? If you scored more than 15 out of 30, you'd get funding. Yet there was a different criteria for Māori businesses. They didn't have to meet the score. Why was that, and what counts as a Māori business?
Well, I think Māori businesses self-determine if they are or not. But keeping in mind, we also talked to...
was that clear for applicants that there was a different criteria, that if they self-identified as a Māori business, they didn't have to reach the score?
Well, my understanding is once the businesses that had been determined as being eligible or ineligible, that list was then sent around to a whole lot of different government organisations to check that we'd actually got it right. One of those was Māori Tourism, and they made a couple of recommendations, and those recommendations were accepted.
Minister, you have on this program repeatedly said that tourism has had targeted support and lots of it, but this suggests that you gave it to the wrong companies in some cases, didn't you, Minister?
No, I would disagree with that, Lisa. We have, overall, MB estimates that the tourism sector has received around $4 billion. A lot of that has been targeted, a lot of that has been general support in the form of wage subsidy and COVID support payments. But this has been an industry that we have given a lot of money to. But having said that, I have always acknowledged in the 18 months that I've been the Minister that this is also a sector where a lot of businesses have done it really, really tough. And I suspect if we hadn't given this money to a number of these strategic businesses, then they would no longer be around.
Is the government at all sorry about the mistakes it's made here?
Well, everything we've done with regard to COVID, and I've said to you before that I've sat around the cabinet table for the last 2 years when all decisions have been made. Every single thing has been done with a no regrets policy. You know, we will admit that in hindsight, perhaps we could have done some things better. But we always made decisions based on the information we had in front of us, and we always sought to gather as much information as possible so we could make informed, good decisions that kept our community safe, kept businesses going, and kept workers connected to their jobs. And, we are all wise in hindsight, Lee. So I look at this report and I read it and I say, OK, perhaps we could have done things better. And I do acknowledge that. But at the point in time when ministers were making decisions, we had information in front of us, and it was only that information upon which we could make decisions. It was a time of great uncertainty. We needed to get money out the door. It wasn't a time when we could have spent 6 months consulting.
Thanks for joining us, Minister. That is the current Tourism Minister, Stuart Nash, there, saying they're operating a no-regrets policy when it comes to the Strategic Tourism Assets Fund. Some of the criteria and the transparency around it have been criticised by the Auditor-General today. Feedback coming in on that. James says, it always amazes me that the likes of AJ Hackett Bungee, that came off the back of a massive summer into COVID, was suddenly broke and needed a handout. Maybe the owner spent it on his failing vineyard. In fact, all these tourism companies in Queenstown were creaming it for decades. Where has all the money been spent? Andrew says the fund to support tourism was a great example of the rich getting richer and aspiring getting poorer. And this one from Mike is interesting. Don't understand why the government thought it was a good idea to look after tourism operations that have deep pockets already. Surely they could weather the storm. Much better to spread the grants around to more smaller businesses. It's like Powerball, all going to one person when it could be better to make 23 millionaires. Cheers, says Mike. Thanks for getting in touch. It is 22 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tributes are pouring in for the leading Māori legal scholar Moana Jackson, who has died after a lengthy illness. He's being remembered as a tireless advocate for criminal justice reform and constitutional change. Here's Māori News reporter Jamie Tahana.
A gentle giant with a formidable intellect who never lost sight of the kaupapa. Just one of the many tributes honouring Moana Jackson. Professor Jane Kelsey was a close friend. remembering him as a rangatira of great patience and determination.
Incredible tolerance and patience in the face of some quite extraordinary provocations. And I think that was one of his huge strengths, was that he never got diverted into any of those rabbit holes.
Of Ngāti Parau and Ngāti Kahungunu, Moana was the son of All Black Everard Jackson and the younger brother of Sid, a founding member of Ngā Tamatoa. He co-founded the Māori Legal Service in the 1980s and wrote the report He Whai Pānga Hau on Māori and the justice system. It was based off consultation with thousands of Māori, detailing their experiences of the system. 30 years on, it's still described as a watershed and widely referenced. Despite a political backlash and death threats, Moana Jackson never wavered. Again and again, he described the effects of colonisation and called for constitutional change, for adherence to te tiriti.
What needs to be addressed is the fundamental injustice, and to address that, we have to look at the past which created the injustice, not to stay frozen there, not to wallow in guilt or recrimination, but to find positive answers to address the problems which will confront us in the future.
Today, Moana Jackson is being remembered as a stirring orator and powerful writer, but also a gentle, humble and generous teacher, activist, father and grandfather. Political scientist Maria Baj says he's an inspiration to many.
His intellect and his softly spoken manner, I think, encouraged people to have the courage to stand against racism. His work in Mā Tike Mai, looking at constitutional transformation, has also encouraged some of this momentum that we've seen and inspiration for doing things differently in Aotearoa.
His insight was sought internationally too. He helped draft the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and was on Indigenous tribunals in the US and Canada. In the 1990s, he advised the interim Bougainville government during the peace process there. A Bougainville leader, Martin Miriori, says he was able to bridge divides in the Civil War.
He was one of the foundation on the issue of us getting proper advice as to how to go about pushing for self-determination for Bougainville. He was quite instrumental. And of course we understood because, the Maori situation was kind of comparable to our, what we were fighting for.
Back in Aotearoa, he was a tireless advocate for Māori rights, Pākai Tore, the foreshore and seabed, the Tūhoi raids. He worked as a mentor too, offering his time to many up-and-coming students and lawyers. One of them was Julia Whaiputi.
He has been driven by unwavering aroha for our people. And so even though everyone talks about the gentle giant, of which he is, he has not wavered from his commitment for us to exist.
He had been ill for a while, but worked right until the end. He wrote prolifically, never tiring of the goal of a greater Aotearoa. Every apparent reality has its own possibilities for something better, he wrote in one of his last columns, and even darkness and despair can be followed by the light of a better dawn, when no one should be seen as less worthy.
At his first stand-up show since Monday's Oscars, Chris Rock says he's still processing what happened at the awards and will talk about it at some point. That's all the comedian had to say today about getting struck by Will Smith, having made a joke about the Best Actor winner's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. Meanwhile, Smith faces a possible suspension or expulsion from the Academy for his actions. In a statement, the Academy revealed today Smith was asked to leave during the awards but refused. CNN's Brian Todd reports.
Tonight, the Board of Governors of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences initiated disciplinary proceedings against actor Will Smith for violating the Academy's standards of conduct, according to a statement from the Academy. Violations which, it says, include inappropriate physical contact, abusive or threatening behavior, and compromising the integrity of the Academy when Smith slapped Chris Rock live at the Oscars.
That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow.
In its statement, the Academy also apologized to Rock and said Will Smith was asked to leave the ceremony and refused. Comedian Wanda Sykes, one of the 3 co-hosts of the Oscars, broke her silence on Ellen DeGeneres' talk show.
And I just felt so awful for my friend, Chris, and it was sickening. It was absolutely. I physically felt ill, and I'm still a little traumatized by it. For them to let him stay in that room and enjoy the rest of the show and accept his award, I was like, how gross is this? This is just the wrong message, Like, you assault somebody, you get escorted out the building, and that's it, But for them to let him continue, I thought it was gross.
Sykes' co-host, Amy Schumer, posted a statement on Instagram saying, "I'm still in shock and stunned and sad." An uncensored feed from a Japanese outlet shows how Rock and Smith reacted immediately afterward.
Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Will Smithにやられました。
Keep my wife's name out your mouth. Wow, dude. Yeah. It was a G.I. Jane joke. Keep my wife's
G.I. Jane のジョークだったんです。
How could the Academy punish Smith if it chooses to do that?
I can see them possibly taking steps about his membership in the Academy. I mean, they could remove him from the Academy. They could take away his voting rights for future Oscar votes. They could take away his participation in other Academy events. And they could ban him from coming back next year. I think that's most likely.
What most observers don't expect is for the Academy to take away the Oscar that Smith just won for Best Actor in the movie King Richard. The Academy didn't take Oscars away from Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein after sexual assault allegations were leveled against him. And director Roman Polanski was awarded an Oscar while he was a fugitive from the U.S., decades after he pleaded guilty to having unlawful sex with a minor. The Academy did expel Weinstein, and once expelled actor Carmine Caridi for violating the Academy's voting rules.
All we've got time for this evening. The late news team will keep you updated throughout the night. You can catch up on Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts if you missed anything. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi from 5 a.m. tomorrow on First Up. After 32 years in business, iconic Newmarket business, Route 66 has closed its doors.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Ivy Ashton tēnei. Around 15 demonstrators gathered at Parliament this afternoon with social media showing vaccine protester Brett Powers being arrested for breaching bail. The Christchurch City Councillor, who was harassed online last year, hopes more women can learn from her efforts to unmask the culprit. Some parts of Hawke's Bay have experienced double or triple the normal amount of rainfall for March. And US intelligence shows Kremlin officials are misleading President Vladimir Putin about the success of his army's invasion of Ukraine. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
So you think it's personal? The allegation here is that she's taking this personally. She doesn't like you, so you're not going to get your meeting.
Absolutely. You only have to see her attack on me in the house today as a retired police officer that it's very personal for her.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the